the 8.4, 8.5 trigonometry notes for CP geometry. For trigonometry, we're bringing back what we talked about with the calculator lesson with sine, cosine, and tangent, and bringing in the actual geometry part of it. And you can see here at the top of your notes, you have two figures, both of them marked slightly differently, just depends on where you're standing inside the figure. First of all, sine, denoted as sin, sin. You saw that on your calculators as you explored the calculator activity. This little symbol is just called theta. It's just another name for an x or some variable that it stands in for, so you don't have to worry about or panic about what that symbol means. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And tangent is opposite over adjacent. So just again, depending on where you're standing in the figure. So if you're standing here as opposed to here, this is the angle you're finding. If you go through the figure, you're opposite that side. If you're next to one, that's the adjacent side. The hypotenuse is always across from the 90-degree angle. And same thing applies here. In this case, if you're standing up here inside the figure, this side would be opposite because, again, it's through the figure. Adjacent is the one you're right beside or touching. And again, the hypotenuse is across from the 90-degree angle. So there's your SOHCAHTOA. SOH, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. So we just use that abbreviation a lot in geometry. We just call it SOHCAHTOA, just a way to remember your trig functions. So moving into the first couple exercises, you see it says round side lengths to the nearest tenth and angles to the nearest whole degree. So round your answers appropriately. And again, what you might want to do is draw a little figure inside where you're at. Draw a little stick figure. So that helps a lot of people sometimes, just imagining that that's where you are in relation to whatever other parts are given. So if you're standing here, this of course would be the opposite, and this would be the adjacent. So if you're doing opposite and adjacent, that is tangent. So you can use the tangent function of 38 degrees. There's your 38 where you're standing. Tangent of 38 is opposite over adjacent, x over 20. And we did this with the calculators in a previous lesson, so I'm going to kind of bypass explaining how to do that precisely. Just multiply real quick. Calculators 15.6, and it's 0.6 because that is a side length, and that would be to the nearest tenth. Next example, again, imagine yourself standing right here. Maybe draw a little stick figure if you need to, if it helps mentally. And then you have the adjacent and a hypotenuse. Hypotenuse is across from the 90. Adjacent because you're right next to it. So adjacent and the hypotenuse would be your cosine function. So cosine of x, this is a degree measurement this time, so you're going to round to the nearest whole degree, is equal to 8 over 15, adjacent over hypotenuse. So you're going to plug this in a calculator, 8 divided by 15, hit your second function key. Don't forget the second function if you're finding the x value, if you're finding the degree measurement. So you're going to do your second cosine, and that should round to 58 degrees. Your third example here, again, draw your little stick figure. Based on where you're standing, you have the opposite and the hypotenuse. So opposite over hypotenuse would be your sine function. So the sine of 42 is equal to x over 18. Just multiply these together. Do your sine of 42 first. Do your trig function first. 42, hit your sine function, times 18 equals 12.0. Moving to the next example, example 4. Where you're standing, I stopped making stick figures. If you need to keep doing that, please do so. So you're standing here, that's your opposite and your hypotenuse, so that's sine again. And you're finding the angle measurements. You're going to have to use your second function key when you get to that point. 22 over 35, go ahead and divide. 22 divided by 35, hit your second function key, and then sine equals 39 degrees to the nearest whole degree measurement. Example 5, you are standing here. Yes, you have the answer this time, and that's okay. Based on where you're standing, you have the opposite and adjacent. That would be tangent. Based again on where you're standing, opposite and adjacent. Tangent of 20 degrees is 10 over x. We talked about in our previous lesson how to manipulate these. You're just going to switch these. So it's going to be 10 divided by the tangent of 20, and that should be 27.5. Moving to example 6, based on where you're standing, again, draw your little stick figures if you need to. Based on where you're standing, you have the opposite and adjacent. Opposite and adjacent is tangent. So tangent of x Remember, you're going to find your angle measurement here, so that's going to be the second function when you get to that point. 31 divided by 17, hit equals. Do your second function key and then hit tangent, hit equals again, 61 degrees. And the last example, again, based on where you're standing, draw your little stick figure if you need to. You have the opposite and hypotenuse because it's not adjacent this time, it's hypotenuse because it's across from the 90-degree angle. Any side across from the 90-degree angle is always your hypotenuse. So that's opposite and hypotenuse, which is sine. So the sine of 65 is x over 44. That's a simple multiplication. Once you do your trigonometry function here for 65 degrees, hit sine, multiply by 44, 39.9.